has already been done. I was listening to Madam Asma, President of IFAC, and it was really a treat for us to understand the role of IFAC, the importance of sustainability, and the relevance of sustainability for the accountants. In our panel discussion, we are going to cover sustainability and resilience in organizations during crisis. So if we look at the topic, we have three key words here: sustainability, resilience, and crisis. Where there is crisis, there is economic downturn. And in economic downturn, it is really affect the countries, the organizations, the individuals. Everybody is at a loss then. This can get even worse if the measures taken to counter those crisis situation may result in something really gross loss for maybe a country or an organization or for individuals as well. So if we really look at the countries, the organizations where there is resilience, and that resilience is for the sustainability of the organizations, that carries some importance. The organizations where there's been studies that have adopted environment, social, and governance practices, it has shown that there is greater resilience, and those organizations have taken benefit of that. Now, for the countries, for organizations, and for the individuals, is that going to be an individual action on everybody's part? So the answer is no. It has to be worked together. All of them have to stand together for the country, for their organizations, and of course, impacting their own individual roles and life. So in that context, I'm setting the scene for my panelist that Suzanne is sitting in Ireland, Dr. Hadi in UAE, Ayman Mukhtar in Egypt. So we have a coverage across many regions. So maybe the experience of each individual panelist may be different in terms of what crisis mean to your region, your country, or maybe in your role as in your organization. So let us start by asking what crisis mean to each one of you. Let me start with Dr. Hadi Shahid Saab. Dr. Hadi, if you can kick off this discussion and explain or define what crisis mean to you in the region where you are, and maybe what you have experienced in terms of your own organization. They'll follow with Suzanne and Ayman Mukhtar. Over to you, Dr. Hadi.
Thank you, Farooq, and assalamu alaikum to all the audience. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Yes, being in a very small country, but very centric to the crisis in the past many decades, I have seen very closely the crisis of Iran-Iraq war, the Gulf War of '91, the oil for food crisis of Iraq, the Lebanese war and then subsequent crisis, COVID-19, Ukraine, Russia, and UAE has been badly affected in many crises and very luckily benefited from many crises. So it's a very unique experience we have been having here. The crisis from the financial side to the social side. I'm a social community worker as well as a public accountant. So I have seen these impacts very closely like during the Gulf War, we had issues of the airlines closing down. So people have been rushing back to their home countries. The crisis of unknown fear was spreading. The recent crisis of the COVID-19, a fear of health, a fear of death, a fear of financial crisis. Almost 1 million people lost their jobs in UAE and they had to leave for their country. You see, the crisis in a normal country having its own population are faced in a different way. The crisis in a country which is for 90% of the population is a transit country are looked into in a very different angle, because whenever we say when the dark starts, everyone, including birds, look for going back home. So that concept, when the crisis comes, everyone working here starts looking, how would I reach to my home place? And so the second quarter of 2020, there have been hundreds of queues outside the airlines offices in UAE, looking for the seat for the people to go back. And then the communities organizing the food for the unemployed people. The embassies are working for collecting money and giving them resources to go back to their home countries. So the crisis have been of many magnitudes. It is simply defined as a condition of instability and danger. It can be a social, economic, political. Luckily, we have a good political stability. We have a good economic stability. With these two, we still had the crisis in this area. Unpleasant consequences of living for the living being. A crisis in an instant where something or someone is dealing with one or more extremely serious issues. A crisis is any situation that could affect an individual, a group, or the entire society, and could result from an event or time period. The negative changes in human or environmental affairs are referred to as crises, particularly when they happen suddenly and with little to no notice. So, had a good experience looking at from the SME side as my clientels, our own practices, the community at large, particularly the Pakistani community living in the United Arab Emirates. I believe that the crisis is a matter of management. And those who can manage it, they become more stronger and have a more resilience for future matters to face. Thank you, Farooq.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like your comment about UAE being a transitory place and people go there and look forward to going back home. Interesting.
People like me can live 40 years and still be in transit.
We welcome you back anytime. Okay, so coming to your part of the world, Suzanne, how have you experienced, or how would you define a crisis in your jurisdiction?
Assalamu alaikum, and I also would like to say, and apologies for my pronunciation, Bohut Shukriya. For the opportunity to speak. Defining crisis in Ireland, it feels as if we have been in a permanent state of crisis. And I wonder, is that more our definition of crisis rather than the true nature of crisis itself? We have, obviously, like everybody else, have gone through the COVID pandemic. And before then, it feels like there wasn't much of a recovery after the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. And of course, Ireland has been still recovering from the conflict in the north of Ireland, where we had 30 years of armed conflict between the paramilitaries and armed forces, which came to a conclusion with a Good Friday Agreement. So it does feel as if we lurch from crisis to crisis. And certainly at this time of the year, in Ireland, we always experience a crisis in our health service, and we're, I think, possibly unusual in the European context in that we have a huge housing crisis with 11,000 homeless people, which for a country of our size is rather extraordinary. But I think it would seem to me, though, as if the poly crisis that was identified this week in the World Economic Forum's risk report, which was mentioned by your previous speakers, also certainly pertains to Ireland, in that there's many interdependent risks that are now coming to form this kind of poly-crisis risk landscape for the country. But that being said, like Dr. Shahid also said, is that there is, it is more to, I think, the definition of crisis. There is many opportunities that are there for business, but you can really see the role of accounting coming to the fore in that, in monitoring the risks, and then also in managing the opportunities. And I particularly like Dr. Shahid's comment about managing. It's who manages the crisis. So I do see, from an observer's point of view, from a professional accounting organization's point of view, the role of accountants in helping people through the poly-crisis situation.
Right. Thank you, Hussain. Moving on to Ahmed Mukhtar. So you, again, your area and more expertise in terms of food and agriculture. So this is one topic probably around the world. The importance of food system cannot be, undermined. So in terms of these COVID-19 Ukraine war, because Ukraine has been a food supplier, but also if we look at the climate side of it, so all these things together is probably something, a perfect recipe for a crisis that probably you have looked at. So your views on that.
Thank you very much, Farrukh. It's nice to be back to my fraternity, if I can call, because I spent 3 years with you guys before joining the public sector. So that's my other side. On the crisis, in my view, we have to understand that change is the only constant thing. We know that. So when you are an agent of change, you find yourself with an opportunity. But if you're a victim of change, you find yourself in a crisis. And of course, we all are in multiple crises now, and the world had always seen one or the other crisis. At present, in my view, the real crisis is lack or absence of recognition of the fact that we are going through a global reset. I repeat, the world is going through a reset, be it economic, political, or social. That is why we see the manifestations of this reset in different forms of crises, whether the political crisis, economic, and so on and so forth. Going on to the food crisis, for example. Yes, we do have a global food crisis because every night about 800 million people go hungry, while the other fact is that at this point in time, we have sufficient food to feed everyone in this world. And at the same time, almost 1/3 of the food is lost or wasted. So these type of things are contributing to the crisis. Coming directly to the region where I'm working right now, basically I work mostly on multilateral policies on the food. There are 4 C's, I call, of the crisis in food security. Climate change, for sure, number 1. Conflicts, particularly in our region. The COVID-19 that really disturbed the recent supply chains and so on and so forth. And most importantly, the consumers. The consumer demands, consumer habits, and everything is changing. People are going into the higher level of their dietary needs when it comes to the middle class, and the upper class is changing its dietary patterns as well. And that leaves a little bit rough space for the lower class, or about 60 to 70% of the consumers around the world. Now, how are we dealing with these crises? I think we would probably discuss that in the next part of the discussion, but everyone is dealing in a different way. The immediate thing or immediate response that we saw at the global level is to look inwards at the country's level. Unfortunately, we do not have a real global framework to deal with crisis. We do have pledges, we do have these so-called announcements and so on and so forth, but we have a global recognition, probably a collective recognition, but we always have the local solutions. So there is a need to find the global solution. I would stop here, and I think you would have probably the next round of questions where we can go into details of what could be done, and particularly what this profession can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. So if we summarize like the definition of crisis, if you go to the Middle East part, there's experience from some military action. If we go to the Ireland part, I think they mentioned about the health crisis coming out of the COVID. Food crisis is something which is there, the wastage of food. It is not really dependent upon a particular event, but this is something which is there as far as that sector is concerned. But you again very experienced in terms of looking at the responses that your organization or you yourself may be part of those responses that while experiencing in your organization, you have seen that this is how the organizations have responded to such crisis situation, so that our audience can really benefit from those that level of thinking, how you can come out of those crises, or at least you can mitigate the impact of the damage that comes through the crisis. So let's start with Ahmed Mukhtar.
Okay, thanks, Farag. Thanks. I can continue with that. Let me narrow down then to the food security crisis. Unfortunately, at the global level, if we look at the food security governance mechanism, we do not have a uniform global governance mechanism. And that is primarily due to the fact that whenever it comes to the food and agriculture policies, the political economy overtakes the hardcore economy. We don't think more from an economic feasibility or transactional perspective. Rather, we look at the the political cost of any of the steps. And that leads us to having inefficient, non-inclusive, and unsustainable agri-food systems almost all over the world. Having said that, we have to understand that probably except 23 or 24 countries, all other countries are not self-sufficient in food. You have to import one thing or the other. Now, when it comes to the international trade in food and agriculture, again, we are much more conservative, much more inward-looking, and much more protectionist than the industry products. And this is counterintuitive because food is the first thing that we want to have at the global level. So for now, we understand that at the G20 level, of course, I mean, we have the Committee on World Food Security that is housed at FAO. We had the United Nations Food Systems Summit that was held in 2021. But in concrete terms, I think it would be most probably the G20 platform that would come up with some of the guidelines that would usher into a new food security global governance mechanism that would try to figure out the gaps and where the countries can, contribute towards a global solution for the food security. Because for now, as I said, we have witnessed inward-looking policy orientation by the countries. We have witnessed the move towards self-sufficiency, import substitution, and shortening of the supply chains. And all of these things may not be economically feasible. At the organizations level, in fact, particularly organizations that are into agri-food business and others, we have seen that they are striving towards more agility, being more responsive and flexible enough to adapt to the changes and find pathways out of these crises. And that is particularly in response to these uncertainty or volatility in the global food supply chains. At people, at our level, who are the ultimate victims of any crisis, and particularly food crisis, we are probably, I think, not fully cognizant of the fact that there is a crisis and its impact, except managing the day-to-day issues such as the food inflation and so on and so forth. So all in all, I would say that the word that I use, that we are in a reset. There are new boundaries, there are new food system definitions being defined at the global level, and that would probably trickle down to the businesses, to the organizations, and then to the individuals. But that would take a bit of time, a bit of pain as well, including economic and social pain. And then probably we might come up with a new balancing equation in many of the sectors, including the food. Thank you.
So the key message I can hear is that now the response of the countries and organizations have been to look inwards. That's interesting. So Dr. Hadi, you mentioned defining the crisis that you have seen 1 million people going out of their jobs and then being in a transitory phase, going back to their countries. So what has been the response of those organizations dealing with such situation where there is a large exodus of people, how they were able to remain afloat with facing such huge exit from any organization?
Well, the system, the way the governance of UAE is done, the government and most of the organizations react very fast to the issues, both negatives and positives. So on the side of it, when the crisis started, of course, there have been a huge crisis of fear of unknown. The government changed the labor laws, allowed every contract can be amended, salaries could be reduced. And as I mentioned, that the fear of living in the transit makes people uneasy, and they try to take a comfort to their back home countries. A quite number of people left the country. And as soon as the situation started recovering, there have been more recruitments, and good luck to the Expo 2020, which although did not happen in 2020, but in 2021, this 1 million plus another 500,000 came back to the work. So organizations here and the government regulations really work faster than any other location in the world. And agility, their ability to perform, their ability to transform into the revised business plans and actively perform is second to none at the moment in the world. I must say that, both on individual levels, SMEs, as well as the very large organization and the governments as well. So the regulations were kept on going to be more friendly, to allow people to come in and take their places, get more organized, more digitalization, but physical recovery has been very fast. And by now, as we are sitting in 2023, I think the country has not only recovered, it had been much more faster in economic growth than it used to be before.
Yes, you're right, Qadi. Clearly, like sitting from here, from Pakistan, we can see that how well the response has been, and bringing the things normal back again. I think there's a lot to learn from how the organizations and at the government level, UAE has responded. Suzanne, you touched upon the health sector. So in terms of the response, if we just narrow it down to the health sector, what has been the response?
Well, if I may, actually, the health sector was one of many crises that we would have identified. I think I mentioned it simply because it's so in the news currently in Irish media. But other issues that we face, and if it's okay for me to talk about those instead, I will, would be Brexit. which obviously is something that impacts on the Irish economy considerably. And that's the UK, which will be one of our largest trading partners, leaving the European Union, and also the supply, the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis. So we would mirror the risk register that was identified by the World Economic Report that I mentioned earlier. In that cost of living crisis would probably be at the top of the tree in our list. And what the government is doing with those two, the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis for business, is that before Christmas, we brought out a budget, our budget 2023, and in it introduced a scheme, the Temporary Business Energy Support Scheme for Business, which was to allow businesses to avail of some funding if they had a certain percentage of increase in their energy costs. What's very interesting, though, is that there's been a surprisingly low uptake on this fund. And it was something that our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, commented on only this week, that even though supports are being provided, it's not always a given that businesses will avail of the supports, which was unusual. For me, I was somewhat disappointed actually by one of the supports, in that initially the government had tried to tie the support, this business energy support scheme, with the requirement on businesses to avail of a carbon calculator that it makes available to businesses free of charge. It's called the Climate for Business, an online resource service. And initially, our revenue, which is the tax system in Ireland, the obligation or the ability to avail of this Temporary Business Energy Support Scheme was contingent upon having performed a carbon footprint assessment, and also to have shown evidence that you had taken steps to reduce your energy use. Now, that requirement was actually decoupled, which is where I found it rather disappointing, because I'm very much in agreement with Mr. Mukhtar's comment about the Great Reset, that it's a requirement now for all businesses to change how they do business, how they look at resources that they're using. And I found that this was a very interesting metaphor in the response to crises in Ireland. This requirement initially of the government for the provision of this funding, the support to businesses that were struggling, then the initial requirement to ensure that there was a recognition by businesses of carbon footprint and the impact that businesses have on the environment. And then the removal of that requirement, because that was felt it was too onerous on businesses, which I personally wouldn't agree with. And then also the low take up. So I think it's quite, for me, it painted an interesting picture of Ireland's response to the crisis, kind of both nationally and then in the micro level with the smaller businesses.
Right.
So I didn't answer the health service question there. We're still struggling with that particular one, but I was keen to sort of get onto the cost of living and the energy issue.
Certainly, like the handling such a level of crisis is difficult, and there are measures, and then one has to see how successful those are. But now we know the level of crisis and how we have responded around the world. But that is something which is now known to us, like what happened to us. But going forward, we all know there could be any more issues, or a significant event may come, maybe an environment issue, a technological issue, again, a medical side, something like COVID-19 again popping up. So anything can happen, because now the message is clear that the future is uncertain. It's volatile, it's uncertain. Now, taking all this into account, very briefly, if we start with Ahmed Mukhtar, how can we risk-proof that? How can we bring in the resilience in organizations? So if your 2 sentences on very broader macro level guidance to all the audiences, that this is how you thinking about future, learning from the past, and bringing resilience to your organization?
Thanks, Farah. I mean, this is $1 million question. You know, I wish we knew the answer. But the simplest would be that we know, as you said, we have to recognize that there will be change, not that there could be, there will be. And as I said, this global reset or the great reset, as Susan said, this will show many changes, many disruptions in the way we work, we operate, we perceive, and so much so that in some sense, we might even see a major disruption in the economic and in the way we account for economy or the GDP counting. I mean, that's a very tall claim, but some of economists like me are anticipating to that extent. Now, the biggest thing is the ability to adopt or adapt the change. That is what would be, in my view, if you are evaluating a going concern as an auditor, you know, as a chartered accountant, for me, financial is not really the indicator for a going concern. It is how much adaptable you are to these changes. Now, the point is that you cannot define the changes, as you said yourself, Farah. The changes could be any. For example, the way of doing businesses, I mean, look at the big companies like Levers and so on and so forth, how much long-term employees they are anticipating. I mean, people are shelving their pension plans, for example. This Japanese model of spending whole of your life in a company is no more present even in Japan, and you know, so on and so forth. More and more contracting, more and more outsourcing, more and more teleworking, and so on and so forth. All of these things would impact your productivity, your way of business, and your financial and other operations as well. So this ability to be ready for change, to adapt to the change, and then, you know, be responsive to that change would probably define how resilient an organization would be or could be in this changing scenario. Thank you.
I think great comment about the adaptability. I think that is very clear. Suzanne, your take.
Apologies, I was muted. For me, I think resilience very much comes down to your ability to withstand and survive and thrive. And that is a very fundamental difference between sustainability and resilience. So sustainability means survival. And in the context of, say, climate change, it's going to be, can you survive climate crisis? Can you survive climate stress? Resilience then is going to be the ability to thrive in that environment, to be flexible, to be adaptive, absolutely. And although we did say that it is impossible to predict what's going to happen, and it's very few, I imagine, saw the pandemic on the horizon and were able to prepare for that. But I think what really demonstrated the ability to survive and thrive was the ability to react, and to react quickly, and also to know. So while we don't know what's happening, the more we can inform ourselves about the risks that are pending, the better positioned we will be to respond to those in a realistic manner. And when I say realistic, it means understanding the full depth and breadth of the risks, and not looking long term, and not always looking. And there's a phrase, it's a very Irish phrase, I appreciate, but it's not always looking at the inch in front of the saw. So it means when you're sawing a piece of wood, not always looking at that tiny bit ahead, looking broader, and information, and getting as much of that as possible.
Yeah, I think clearly understanding risk is the key word. Dr. Hadi, I think your jurisdiction has been resilient, and I'm sure your organization as well. What message do you want to give?
Well, as Ahmed and Susan also said, it's a matter of the ability to react and prepare yourself, react in a prepared manner. So the way the future seems to be, that the change and impacts are a reality. To what extent and to what time, to which country? And in the past 20 years of the globalization, anything happens to any corner of the world, by and large, the impact goes to the other areas. Who knew that Ukraine and Russian war will impact everyone in the world. Perhaps before the information was given that the Ukraine was producing 25% of the food for the whole world. We always thought that is such a small country in Europe, which is so insignificant to be talked about, except certain tourism areas. So the adaptability and the basis of the knowledge to the managers and the people who are at the helm of the affairs, particularly in the finance and the management. So it all relates to what the changes in the curriculum should come, how the future generations to be prepared from their educational and training point of view, how adaptable the organizations and the governments should be on that, and the ability to because nobody have any control on the crisis, particularly the people, professionals like all of us, do analyze things but do not create. So we are only analyzing what is happening, how it is happening in future. So ability to analyze it quickly and giving the solution to the managements and management's ability to adapt it, and the governance to give the facilities to the societies and the communities. And that should be the way forward for everyone to survive in a more better way than in the past.
Right.
Or can I take a minute, please?
Yeah, please.
Thanks. No, I just remember an anecdote from Dr. Hadi's point. In fact, on from 23rd to 25th of February, we were in UAE. The government of UAE hosted the Food for Future Summit. And in all of that summit, because I deal with international trade issues on food and others, so was very happy to come up with a communique that the international markets can address all of the food supply chain issues, don't think about self-sufficiencies, deploy more technology and others. And exactly the same day, we had this thing, and look at now. I'm just saying that things move so quickly that you cannot even imagine. Thank you.
Right. Exactly, and that's what Dr. Hadi is saying, prepare, and prepare. Let me go a little technical now. Then you had the sustainability function in your organization. We all know COP26 brought us the ISSB announcement, the formation of International Sustainability Standard Board. And clearly we all know that the investor require more information. The financial information that currently goes to the investors, that is taken as not good enough. So there is a demand for more. And here comes the sustainability then. So this International Sustainability Standard Board, and we are aware of the two exposure drafts, S1 and S2 that they have issued. What is your perspective in this regard? What framework in your jurisdiction is there something which is followed, or what are your views in respect to the sustainability related frameworks for the organizations to prepare themselves for future corporate reporting in this respect? Suzanne.
Yeah. It's the good question, as they say, the $1 million question. And it was the case, I think, that it wasn't so much that there wasn't enough sustainability related information appearing, it was that wasn't comparable. So investors were struggling to be able to compare data from one company with another company and to draw conclusions and have enough decision useful information from those. And it's led to an extremely fast convergence of standards, or certainly an attempt to have a convergence of standards across the world. And we've gone from some huge amount of frameworks. I think there was about 600 not to say the last count, but certainly at a count that was performed by Accounting for Sustainability a couple of years ago. Obviously, the dominant, the Gang of Five, as they were, have coalesced and they've come now more under the banner of ISSB. And in Europe, obviously, we have to look at not just the ISSB standards, but also the standards that are being created by EFRAG in Europe, and to see how those will work. And we also are keeping an eye on the corporate sustainability disclosures regulation, which is about to, I get confused myself with the amount of acronyms, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is being transposed into law. So our teams are looking to see how those will work together, which will be the most useful for individual company requirements. But also, as a professional accounting organization, our role through our teams is very much to inform members on how they can work on their capacity building and to keep them abreast of all the developments in these areas. And there's one framework that I didn't mention there, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. And while there is no one there's no one standard that's recommended by any government or any association, I did note that our then Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe, had publicly welcomed the TCFD and recommended that companies look to it. Now, as people will know, it's no mean feat to prepare disclosures against the TCFD, but it is heartening to see the amount of organisation, the increase in number of regions that are making this mandatory for companies of a certain size. So I know certainly in the UK, it's mandatory to disclose against a TCFD for organisations of a certain size. So it is a very interesting landscape to watch. And it's certainly one that we see as only increasing in velocity, I think.
Yeah, I think what we have up till now discussed and bringing that into the context of the ISSP standard, the S1, which is equivalent to, for accountants, I'm saying it is equivalent to IAS1. It is more about presentation and setting the policies. So we have discussed about the governance part. We have to see the risk management part. Then we have to move on to the matrices, how all of this sustainability-related metrics are to be measured. So I think that is important that our audience need to take this into account, that such standards are now just around the corner in some jurisdiction, some other form, through some legislation has already been there, but for wider communities and countries, I think Madam Asma also mentioned about the adoption of the ISSP standard in each individual jurisdiction would become important, and to get the more understanding about that is something that we all need to be conscious of. But moving away from this technical part, I'll go to Ahmed Mukhtar. For the food and agriculture part, how do you see the policies and their or the overall food system being monitored and analyzed? If you can just give us some insight into that.
Surely. First, as I said, there is no, let's say, one global governance mechanism for food and agriculture, but we have different manifestations. At the global level, of course, sustainable agriculture or greening the agriculture is the buzzword right now. Everyone is trying to be much more sustainable, much more green, and so on and so forth. However, we have to see that traditionally at the global level, our food systems had been geared towards achieving efficiency and productivity, because we needed to enhance the food availability for many countries. However, recently we have witnessed a focus towards sustainability, not in all of the countries. For example, in the EU and Switzerland, they are going far ahead in terms of the sustainability, and they have introduced some of the measures. For example, the food imports have to be sourced from sustainable sources. The recent case of European Union with Indonesia on the palm oil imports is one case, an example. Banana industry fought for such a long time, and so on and so forth. Switzerland is going a step further, that in order to export your food stuff, you have to show, you have to demonstrate your sustainability practices. In terms of the businesses, we have seen that there is a sudden surge in the recognition and adoption of sustainability practices in the businesses or the food-related businesses. For example, the companies like of Nestle's, P&G, and Unilever, and so on and so forth. Now, let me introduce that at the same time, you were talking about the standards, which are reporting standards, but we have about more than 400 private or voluntary sustainability standards in food and agriculture area. More than 400, precisely 489 as per one count. And this is all which is being implemented by businesses. For example, Carrefour has its own 30 plus standards, Walmart and Waitrose and so on and so forth. So we can't say that sustainability is not being taken care of, but I think someone actually asked a similar question as well. These are private and voluntary standards, but a compliance to those standards would have a cost element. And that leads to another discussion of this North versus South, or developed or developing countries, that you can produce sustainable agriculture, produce sustainable food, but who would bear the cost? I mean, New Zealand, as you know, is genetically modifying their cows so that their manure has less methane, because methane is produced from these cow dungs and so on and so forth. How much is the cost? In fact, for one injection, you can buy 2 cows in Pakistan. So point is that we have to think about these type of cost elements or compliance cost of the sustainabilities, but there are, let's say, more and more recognition, more and more adoption of the practices. Of course, reporting, much better, but in the process and in the products as well, at the global and at the enterprise levels. Thanks.
Great insight. From an accountant standpoint, we are more focused towards now the reporting part. So whatever the policies or the cost has been, but now for organizations, especially the corporate sector, would like to have more information on this. I think that is relevant for decision making. Dr. Adi, you want to, if you can throw some light on the greener initiatives that UAE has taken?
Yeah, sure, I would do. But before that, I would, of course, assure Ahmed that we will learn now the food standards as well as the accounting standards. Certainly, the going concern in the finance terms can be measured by figures, but in the real terms, of course, you can measure it about the food availability. Yeah, UAE being a very responsible country, as carbon producers, and they are aware of that situation, that they have to contribute towards the green economy, which will create a sustainable development initiative. UAE has taken a number of initiatives. The head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber, has been nominated to GOP28. And as you know, that Abu Dhabi will be hosting the next conference. And he said, I quote, "This will be a critical year in a critical decade. For climate action, the UAE is approaching COP28 with a strong sense of responsibility and the highest possible level of ambition," unquote. So they are taking a number of initiatives by which the reduction in carbon is done. The policies are for the energy, finance, food security, and youth development. These are the 4 pillars on which the UAE's new economy, new policies are being established post-COVID-19. As you initially said, that every country now looking inward, and with that situation, the policies are being made. The energy being the pillar, investigated ways to improve energy effectiveness, decarbonize the energy system. The finance pillar put a particular emphasis on luring and promoting the green investments. And the food security, which is one of the major pillar of security of the country in UAE, looked at ways to incorporate the sustainability and resilience within the value chain, while the youth pillar focused on the importance of the empowering young people in the engine of the sustainable development. So UAE has taken a number of green initiatives and hopefully that would produce faster results than the crisis next to come.
Thank you, Dr. Adi. I think all along what we have discussed has nothing to do with the financial numbers or the auditing. So it's entirely a different topic and a different skill set. And for audience, I think you have to note that in terms of future, the new skill set that you have to take is something which is not directly the financial number, but also all of this, what we have discussed, has become relevant. So if I just go around and take the final closing remarks, statements from all of you, but please also mention the relevance or importance of this subject for the chartered accountants, for the accountants. That would be, I think, important. So Suzanne, if you start.
Thank you. I think for chartered accountants, they are ideally placed. As we heard from Ms. Asma, they have the skills of professional skepticism, and their reporting skills obviously come to the fore, but also their ability to manage numbers. And when we're talking about numbers, we need to think about examples like Ahmed mentioned of the numbers involved in, say, the two cows in Pakistan versus one cow genetically modified potentially in Switzerland. You're not simply talking about the number of cows there, you're also talking about the percentage of methane that is going up into the environment. So I think it's time that all of the numbers are considered, not simply economically, but also around society and the environment, and how we can maintain resilience in the face of that.
Right. Thank you. Ahmed?
Thanks, Farah. For the chartered accountants, for sure, they are probably the most relevant ones, because when it comes to sustainability and resilience, the biggest challenge is financing. Whether to finance, how to finance, and to basically change and others. And of course, most of the CAs are in decision-making positions. Second, for the CAs, please think not only on the enterprise numbers, but on the country numbers as well, on the collective numbers. That's a mindset change that probably we need to opt. The very final one, since we are going through the global reset, it is better to be an agent of change rather than victim of change, and you will find opportunities. Thank you.
Great message. Dr. Hadi, we started with you, we are ending with you.
Thank you, Farah. I would rather say that to manage crisis, to manage the situation, the first thing one should do is to have a smile. Because if you smile, you get the strength to yourself. And if you have taken a strength, you give the strength to your company, your organization, your country, your society. And the second thing which I said to my partners when we gathered digitally during the lockdown in 2020 March, a sudden lockdown, and nobody knew whether we'll be able to go to office in future or be able to go out of home or what is going to happen. So I told my colleagues that there is an Islamic way of handling the crisis. And that is that you pray 2 rakah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pray and give some charity. That is the way how you can handle. But the most importantly, as chartered accountants, we have the responsibilities to self, to our organizations we are dealing with. If we are in practice, then the clients we are who are taking our advice, and the country and the society at large. And the most important is that we should have the ability to manage, to guide how to manage. I guess that is my message to all the chartered accountants, that their ability to manage the situation in the crisis. And one of the, I won't say mistake, but one of the mythology used by most of the accountants at large is that whenever they talk of crisis, they talk of cost reductions. And cost reductions impacts the society in much negative manners than otherwise. My suggestion will be to look into the business model, re-review the business model, right, rather than only talking about the cost reduction. So with that, my message is, as I said, the skills of managing the affairs.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Dr. Our clear discussion and messages that we have to remain bold. We will face crisis. Crisis will come and go. We have to understand that there is every likelihood of the future being uncertain, volatile, and we have to prepare for that. So in that manner, we will be resilient. Once our organization is resilient, we will have sustainability. And for sustainability, there are ways and means of reporting so that the stakeholders get the information they deserve. So thank you very much, Suzanne, Ahmed Mukhtar, Dr. Hadi. It has been a pleasure having this discussion moderated by myself. So thank you very much. Over to the organizers. Thank you.